On my wedding day, my phone buzzed just as the makeup artist was fixing my veil. One new text from my mom: "Don't expect anyone." No emoji, no explanation, just that. My name is Lauren Parker. I was 29, standing in a white dress in a seaside lodge in California, and I actually laughed at first because I thought it had to be a joke. Who tells their daughter that minutes before she walks down the aisle? I told myself she was just being dramatic, that they'd all be there when the music started and the doors opened. Then the music did start. The doors did open, and the entire left side of the aisle, the side that was supposed to be mine, was nothing but empty chairs and flower petals. No mom, no family, no one. I focused on the man waiting for me at the end and pretended it didn't hurt, pretended my chest wasn't burning every time I glanced at the rows that should have been full. We said our vows, we smiled for the photographer, we cut the cake like everything was normal. It wasn't. Later that night, barefoot in my wedding dress with my heels kicked off in the corner, I finally checked my phone again. There it was, a fresh Instagram post from my cousin. A group photo on a private beach in Hawaii. My mom, my family, all in matching linen, holding cocktails under palm trees. The caption said, "Family, forever." I stared at the screen until my eyes stung, then I typed 2 simple words back to my mom. Perfect timing. That was the moment I stopped begging to be part of their family and started taking my power back. 3 days later, my mom was pounding on my door and screaming, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. They thought skipping my wedding was the worst thing they could do to me. They had no idea what I was about to do to them. Stay with me to the end, and I'll show you exactly how their dream trip to Hawaii became the start of their biggest regret. I did not scream or throw anything that night. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in my wedding dress, makeup smudged, phone in my hand, and I went very, very quiet. My husband, Danny Brooks, sat beside me, still in his shirt and tie, his jacket thrown over a chair. He kept asking, "Are you okay, Lauren? Do you want to call her?" I just showed him the photo again, the one from Maui, and the caption under it, "Family forever." The same woman who spent my entire engagement calling him a high school teacher with no ambition had flown to Hawaii on my wedding day to drink cocktails in matching linen and post about family. My mother, Victoria Parker, liked to say she built everything with my father from nothing, that Parker and Co-Home was her kingdom. That part was technically true. What she left out every time she told that story was me. I was the one who stayed late at the office in Houston, then later logged in from our apartment in Seattle, fixing her mistakes on loan documents, cleaning up their mess when my dad, Rick, forgot to send payroll, smoothing things over with the bank when they pushed the credit lines too far. I was the one who took the accounting courses, who became the one signature every bank officer wanted to see on a form. CFO sounded fancy on paper. In reality, it meant I held the keys to every account they swiped in Hawaii. My mother hated paperwork, hated reading contracts, hated talking to lawyers unless it was about her image. So years ago, she signed power of attorney and joint control over most of the business and family cards to me because it was easier if I handled it. It was supposed to be temporary. It never changed. I had been the safety net for years. I paid off their business trips that were really vacations. I quietly moved money around when my brother Jason overdrew the family credit line, starting one more half-baked project. I told myself that was just what family did. That night, staring at the glowing screen with that stupid caption, something in me snapped into focus. If I could keep them from sinking, I could also let them feel the water for the first time. Danny watched me close the photo and open my laptop. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. "Working," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost bored, but my hands knew exactly where to go. I logged into the main bank portal for Parker & Co. Home, the same system I used every week. Routing numbers, Account lists, corporate cards, family cards, the so-called growth fund my parents love to brag about. My name was on all of it. One by one, I started flipping switches my parents had forgotten I even had. Corporate cards, the ones they were using for the Maui resort and spa charges, set to suspended. Authorized users removed. Access from their personal logins disabled. The Parker Family Growth Fund, the one Jason was already counting on to open his flashy restaurant in Austin, placed on hold pending review. Automatic transfers to my parents' travel account, paused. I emailed the bank manager, a man who had seen me drag my parents through 3 near disasters, and told him I was initiating a review of all shared accounts and would not be approving any new charges without my direct consent. Danny sat beside me in silence for a while, then tried to joke. "So this is what it looks like when the CFO is mad?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This is what it looks like when I stop fixing things," I said. We ate leftover wedding cake straight from the box in bed. He held me while I cried for a few minutes, not just about the photo, but about every time my mother had called him not our level. Every time my father had told me to be reasonable and think about the business over my own life. Then, sometime after midnight, my phone lit up on the nightstand. Group chat, Parker fam. First message, anyone else's card not going through? Then, my room just said the card was declined. Then, what is going on with the business account? I turned the screen face down and went to sleep. I knew this was only the beginning. The money was the first thread. 3 days later, when my mother was pounding on my apartment door in Seattle, that thread would already be unraveling. 3 days after the wedding, Seattle was gray and wet, the kind of morning where the rain hangs in the air like a sulk. I was standing in my tiny kitchen in an old brick building, pouring coffee into my favorite chipped mug, when someone started pounding on the door so hard the frame shook. Danny was still half asleep in the bedroom. I knew exactly who it was before she even opened her mouth. "Lauren, open this door right now." My mother's voice cut through the hallway like a fire alarm. I took one slow sip of coffee, set the mug down, and walked over. When I opened the door, Victoria Parker practically fell into the apartment. She still had a faint tan from Hawaii, still wore a linen dress and big gold earrings, but her face was flushed red with fury. "What did you do?" she hissed, eyes wild. "What did you do to the accounts?" I stepped back, letting her stomp into the living room. She didn't even say hello, didn't ask about the wedding she'd skipped. "Good morning to you too," I said quietly. "Don't play cute with me," she snapped. "The hotel in Maui said the corporate card was declined, the resort charges bounced, my spa appointment didn't go through. I had to use my personal card to get us out of there like some regular tourist. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" I watched her rant about the inconvenience of not being able to charge first-class tickets home to the business, how the manager at the resort had looked at her differently when the card was declined. She said the word declined like it was a slur. Not once did she say the words wedding or sorry. "You chose a beach over my wedding," I said finally, my voice flat. "You chose my ties and matching outfits over watching your daughter get married. So yeah, I know exactly what I did." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, come on, Lauren, it's one day. We told you that date wasn't great for us. You insisted on that stupid lodge. We had a family trip planned for months. You're really going to burn everything down over a small event?" I actually laughed. "My wedding is not a small event," I said. "And you didn't have a trip planned. You booked it after I sent the save the dates. You just didn't think I'd ever call you on it." She jabbed a finger toward me. "You ungrateful child. After everything your father and I built, you think you can just shut off the money because your little feelings are hurt? You think you can embarrass us like that? You fix it. Today. Call the bank, turn everything back on, and stop being dramatic. And while you're at it, you should really think about what you're doing with that teacher." He is not good for our name, Lauren. He is not our level. Behind me, Danny had come out of the bedroom, barefoot, in an old t-shirt, hair messed up, looking more decent than everyone in that Maui photo combined. He started to say something, but I held up a hand. I was done letting her talk about him like he was a stain. First of all, I said, Danny is my husband. You didn't show up, but it still happened. Second, I didn't embarrass you. You did that all by yourself when you chose a family forever photo op over your actual family. Third, I'm not turning anything back on. Her jaw dropped. You don't have a choice. This is our company. And I'm the one whose name is on every signature the bank cares about, I replied. You handed that power to me years ago because you didn't want to read contracts. You just assumed I would always protect you, no matter what you did to me. Her voice went up a notch. You wouldn't even have that job without us. You owe us loyalty. Loyalty goes both ways, I said. You skipped my wedding to go sip piña coladas on a private beach and post about family forever. That was the day you cashed out my loyalty. For a second, just one, I saw something like panic flash across her face. Then it hardened again. You're being insane. Fix the accounts, Lauren, or I swear to God you'll regret this. I stepped toward the door and held it open. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. You already made sure I regretted a lot of things, I told her. Not this. You chose the beach over me, Mom. Now you can choose how to pay for it. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me, then stormed out into the hallway, shouting over her shoulder, You're going to crawl back when this blows up in your face. I closed the door gently, turned the deadbolt, and leaned my forehead against the wood for a second. Danny wrapped his arms around me from behind. Are you okay? He whispered. No, I admitted. But I'm done pretending this is normal. I went back to the kitchen table, picked up my coffee, and opened my laptop again. The temporary freezes I'd put on over the wedding weekend were just the beginning. I submitted the formal documents to the bank to change authorization on the accounts, to require my explicit approval for any major withdrawals, to lock the so-called Parker Family Growth Fund until a full audit was complete. While I was at it, I pulled up a loan I'd always assumed was a business vehicle, and for the first time looked closely at the paperwork. My mother had used my name and credit to finance her latest luxury SUV without ever telling me. There was a box right there that allowed a cosigner to be removed if they didn't consent. I checked it and started that process too. Outside, I could still hear my mother's voice echoing down the stairwell, furious, shocked that the daughter who had always fixed everything was suddenly letting her feel the fall. Inside, in my little kitchen, I took another slow sip of coffee and hit send. They thought their cards declining in Hawaii was the worst of it. They had no idea that mourning was just the first ripple of a much bigger wave. The funny thing about money is that when it's flowing, nobody wants to know how it works. The second it stops, everyone suddenly remembers your number. Within 24 hours of my mother storming out of my apartment, my inbox and phone turned into sirens. Jason was the first one to blow up my messages. At 8:07 a.m., I got a text. Hey, weird question. Did you touch the Parker Family Growth Fund? The bank says it's under review. 5 minutes later. Lauren, seriously, I have meetings scheduled. I already told the landlord in Austin I'm signing the lease this week. Then an email popped up from the loan officer we'd been dealing with for Jason's restaurant, politely notifying us that due to the sudden change in the status of the collateral account, they were pausing final approval. Translation: no more free money. I could almost hear Jason's tantrum through the screen. By lunchtime, my Aunt Monica was calling, her voice high and shaky. Honey, something must be wrong with the system, she said. I was at Nordstrom and they said my Parker card was declined, in front of everyone. I told them I'd call you because you handle these things. Can you just fix it? I have things I need to buy this week. I pictured her standing there in designer heels, clutching armfuls of clothes she didn't need, and for once, I didn't feel that old rush of panic to make it all go away. The cards are under review, I said. I can't just flip them back on. She huffed. Your mother said you're overreacting because she missed your little ceremony. You can't punish the whole family for that. My little ceremony. Right. By the end of the day, the office in Houston had chimed in too. An email from our bookkeeper. Subject line, urgent. The landlord for the warehouse wanted to know why the automatic payment had bounced. The utility company for our Florida vacation house had sent a disconnect notice. Vendors who used to eagerly extend us credit were suddenly asking for payment up front. I spent years making sure those emails never reached my parents by catching problems before they surfaced. Now I let them pile up in my inbox, a digital avalanche of consequences finally rolling downhill to the people who caused them. Late that afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize at first. When I picked up, a familiar voice came through, warm and gravelly. Lauren, it's Martin Cole. You got a minute? Martin had known my parents since before I was born, one of those old-school businessmen who remembered every assistant's name and still carried a leather planner. He'd watched me grow from the kid doing homework in the back office to the woman running the spreadsheets. I'll be honest, he said. Your mother is tearing her hair out. She says you've gone rogue. I almost laughed. I'm just doing my job, I replied. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. That's what I figured, he said. Look, I'm not calling to lecture you. I've told your parents for years they leaned too hard on you without respecting you. They didn't listen. Now they're feeling it. He cleared his throat. Off the record, some folks have noticed you're less involved lately. There's a company I advise, Lighthouse Living, up in the Pacific Northwest. They've been wanting to expand into Texas and Arizona. They're interested in acquiring shares of Parker & Co. if they come with a certain CFO's brain attached, even if that CFO doesn't stay on full-time. You follow? I stared at the wall for a second, letting that sink in. My parents always acted like their name was untouchable, like Parker & Co. was some permanent monument. In reality, it was a mid-sized regional chain in a crowded market. The only reason we'd stayed ahead was the systems I'd built, the relationships I'd maintained. They didn't own that part of me. I did. So, they'd buy my stake, I said slowly, even if I walk away? At a good valuation, Martin said. You'd have a clean exit. They'd get a roadmap. Your parents would get a wake-up call. Everybody wins. Or at least, everybody gets what they've earned. After I hung up, I sat at the table with Danny and told him everything. If you do this, he said gently, there's no going back. They'll say you betrayed them. I thought about the empty chairs at my wedding, the caption on that Maui photo, my mother calling my life event a small ceremony, and my husband not our level. They already did that, I said. I'm just catching up. Over the next week, with Martin's help and a lawyer who worked for me, not my parents, I negotiated the sale of my shares in Parker & Co. home to Lighthouse Living. We went through numbers, contracts, clauses I used to triple-check for my father while he bragged about his empire at dinner. This time, I circled what protected me. When the deal closed, a chunk of money that had once been locked inside the Parker name moved under mine alone. While my family scrambled to adjust to a world where credit wasn't endless and the company name didn't automatically open every door, I started saying no for the first time in my adult life. No, I wouldn't sign another loan. No, I wouldn't fix their cash flow issues. No, I wouldn't answer every frantic call. Instead, I took on a few freelance design clients, the kind of work that actually made me happy. On weekends, Danny and I packed sandwiches and drove out to little parks around Seattle, hiking trails I never had time for when I was tied to my parents' schedules. We ate on a blanket under gray skies, laughing about small things, while my phone buzzed face down in my bag. For years, I'd been the one keeping their world from collapsing. Now I was finally letting them find out what it felt like when I stepped away. And the funny thing was, the more their lives fell apart, the less mine did. It took about 2 weeks for the panic to turn into strategy, or at least whatever my family thought strategy looked like. One afternoon, I was at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, working on a mood board for a small boutique client, when a man in a navy blazer stopped at my table. "Lauren Parker?" he asked. I looked up. It was one of my father's golf buddies, a financial advisor named Tom I'd seen a dozen times at charity galas. The kind of man who always smelled like expensive cologne and country club lunch. "Your father asked me to talk to you," he said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. He thought a neutral voice might help. I almost smiled at the word neutral. "Go ahead," I said. Tom folded his hands like he was about to offer me a mortgage. "Look, everyone agrees mistakes were made," he began. "Your mother knows she hurt your feelings about the wedding, but you've made your point, right? The cards, the accounts, the sale to Lighthouse, that scared them. They're ready to talk about making changes, bringing you back into the fold in a more appropriate role." I raised an eyebrow. "More appropriate than CFO?" He cleared his throat. "They're willing to offer you a very generous compensation package, a new title, full control over the financial side, even some performance bonuses if you return to Parker & Co. and help stabilize things. There is, however, one concern your parents asked me to mention delicately." I waited. "Your husband," he said finally. "They feel that his background doesn't align with the image they're trying to rebuild. The circles they move in, the investors they're courting. It sends a certain message. If you were willing to reconsider that relationship, it would go a long way in convincing them to fully restore your position and your share of decision-making." For a moment, the noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade. It wasn't even surprising, not really, but hearing someone say it out loud like it was a reasonable clause in a contract still made my stomach turn. "So, the deal is," I said slowly, "I get my old job back and they stop screaming if I divorce my husband." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "No one said divorce, just reevaluating whether he's the right long-term partner given everything at stake for the company." I stood up, picking up my laptop. "Tell my father I already made my choice," I said. "And tell him there is no amount of money that makes me trade in my marriage for his image." Tom called after me, saying I was letting my emotions ruin my future. I almost laughed. My future was the first thing in years that didn't belong to them. That night, Jason sent an email with the subject line, "Can we start over?" The first 2 paragraphs sounded almost like an apology, talking about how he understood things got heated, and he could see how the wedding mix-up looked bad. Then came the real reason he was writing. He needed the growth fund unfrozen because his restaurant deal was time-sensitive, and this was his one shot. If I really loved him as a sister, I wouldn't let my issues with Mom ruin his dream. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I told him I hoped he found a way to open his restaurant one day, and that I believed he could, but that I wouldn't be putting my name, my credit, or my work behind any more family ventures. I hit send and waited for the explosion. It didn't take long. The next morning, I got a certified letter from a law office my parents had used before, full of vague legal threats about damages, interference with business relationships, and breach of fiduciary duty. I forwarded it to my own lawyer, the one who had handled my exit. He called me after reading it and actually chuckled. "They'd have to prove you acted outside your authority," he said. "You didn't. They signed those documents. They gave you that power. And if we go to court, all the emails about them skipping your wedding and calling their trip a higher priority than your life event become part of the record. They don't want that smoke." Meanwhile, The loan I'd pulled my name from for my mother's SUV finally processed. I got a notice from the bank confirming I was no longer attached. 2 days later, my cousin Chloe posted a story of my mother at the dealership, red-faced, arguing with a salesman while her luxury SUV sat behind her with a big repo sticker in the window. The caption just said, "Rough week for the Parkers." I should have felt bad. I didn't. Around the same time, Lighthouse Living asked if I'd be open to a short-term consulting contract, helping them implement the inventory systems and reporting structures I had designed in my head, long before my parents ever let me put my name on anything. I didn't give them any of Parker & Co.'s secrets or client lists. I didn't have to. The real value was in how I thought, the processes I built. Those were mine. Within a month of working with them a few hours a week, I watched from the sidelines as their online reviews skyrocketed and more shoppers in Texas started mentioning Lighthouse instead of Parker. The thing my parents were most afraid of, losing status, was happening in slow motion. The final straw, at least for them, came on a Sunday night. I was cleaning up after dinner when a notification popped up on my laptop from an old company Zoom account I still had access to. "Family meeting," the title said. Against my better judgment, I clicked join with the camera off. Faces popped up one by one. My parents in their living room, Jason in what looked like a cramped apartment, Monica with a glass of wine. They started talking over each other immediately. My father blamed my mother for pushing too hard on the Hawaii trip, said if she had just gone to the wedding, none of this would have happened. My mother started crying, insisting she was the real victim, that I had stolen her company. Jason shouted that they always bailed out my mistakes, but the one time he needed help, suddenly everyone was teaching him a lesson. Not one of them, in that entire 40-minute call, said the word sorry. Not one of them said, "We hurt Lauren." I watched them claw at each other, each one trying to find a way to make this my fault, while also begging for a solution only I could give. When my mother finally said, "She'll come around, she always does, she's soft," something in me settled. No, I thought. Not anymore. I closed the laptop. Outside, Seattle rain tapped against the windows. Inside, Danny wrapped an arm around my shoulders on the couch, the two of us quietly watching a movie while my family's world continued to crumble without me holding it up. The thing about revenge, at least the kind I never planned on taking, is that it doesn't arrive as one big explosion. It shows up in 100 smaller ways, day after day, until even the people who swore they were untouchable start to realize the ground under them is gone. A month after that family Zoom call, Parker & Co. Home closed its first store. Officially, the statement said it was a strategic consolidation in Arizona. Unofficially, I knew exactly what it was. That location in Scottsdale had always been one of our more fragile ones. Without the safety nets I used to pull, without the quiet deals I used to make with vendors and landlords, they couldn't keep up. Photos started popping up online. A handwritten closing sign in the window, half-empty shelves, a comment under the local news article that made my stomach flip. Didn't their own daughter get married and they all went to Hawaii instead? Someone wrote. Looks like karma. I hadn't told that story publicly. People talk. Employees talk. Nothing stays hidden when you treat everyone around you like they're disposable. The Yelp and Google reviews began to shift. Slow at first, then in a wave. Mixed in with the usual complaints about shipping delays and paint colors were sharper critiques. Love their products, but can't support a business that treats their own family like that. Heard the owners ditched their daughter's wedding for a vacation. Gross. My parents had always cared more about image than numbers. Watching that image crack was probably worse for them than any balance sheet. Around that time, I got a call from a number tied to an old Houston bank. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. The woman on the line introduced herself as an officer managing several older trusts. "Ms. Parker," she said, We've been trying to reach you about an account in the name of Eleanor Hayes, my grandmother, my mom's mother. The only person in that side of the family who ever sat through my school plays and actually asked how I was doing instead of how my grades were. My chest tightened. The officer explained that before she died, my grandmother had set up a trust, one my parents had never mentioned. It had a condition baked into it. The principal wouldn't be released until I had been financially independent from Parker & Co. for at least 2 consecutive years, with documented proof of income from work unrelated to the family business. According to the records, the woman said, you've met that condition. Your freelance income, your work with Lighthouse Living, and the sale of your shares all qualify. Your grandmother structured it this way, so no one in your family could touch the funds except you. She paused. She also left a note attached. Would you like me to read it? I sat at my kitchen table, fingers tight around my mug, and listened as she read my grandmother's handwriting out loud. Ellie's voice came back to me in every line. She wrote about watching my mother become obsessed with status, about seeing me carry more and more of the load while getting less and less respect. If they ever choose themselves over you, the note said, I want you to have a way out that they can't control. Use this to build a life that has nothing to do with their pride. Don't look back unless it's to be proud of how far you walked. By the time the banker finished, my eyes were wet. This was not money I took from my parents. This was money someone gave me precisely so I would never have to ask my parents for anything again. Within a few months, that trust, combined with my own savings and the consulting income, became the down payment on a small craftsman house in Portland, Oregon. Danny and I signed the papers on a sunny afternoon, our names side by side, no Parkers anywhere in sight. While we were walking through our new empty living room, planning where to put a couch and where we'd hang future photos that actually meant something, my phone buzzed with a text from an old coworker. They're selling the Florida house, it said, and Jason's working part-time at that coffee place on 3rd to make his car payments. Later, I heard my parents had to move out of their big Houston house into something smaller, had quietly lost their seats on the local business boards they loved to brag about. Invitations dried up. People stopped treating them like royalty and started treating them like what they really were. Aging business owners who'd burned too many bridges, including their own daughter. I didn't feel triumphant. It wasn't fireworks. It was more like finally exhaling after holding your breath for way too long. They were living in the world they'd created without me propping it up. I was, for the first time, living in one I chose. I wish I could say there was one perfect moment where everything tied up neatly, where I stood on a metaphorical mountaintop and declared myself healed. Real life doesn't work like that. It came in quieter ways. It was the first Saturday morning in Portland when I woke up to sunlight instead of my phone buzzing with some crisis my parents had created. Danny was already in the kitchen, burning pancakes just a little, playing some old playlist from when we first started dating. I walked into our tiny, messy Hours kitchen and realized I didn't have to check any company dashboard, didn't have to answer any panicked email about a shipment, didn't have to juggle our lives around someone else's emergency. It was just us. A few months later, we hosted a backyard barbecue in our new place. Nothing fancy, just a borrowed grill, folding chairs, mismatched plates. Our friends came over with potato salad and cheap beer, people who had shown up for our wedding when my own family didn't bother. At one point, I stood at the back door and watched Danny telling a dramatic story, using his hands, everyone laughing so hard they wiped their eyes. Someone bumped our wedding photo on the shelf and straightened it. I realized the picture was perfect, even without a single Parker in it. It didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like exactly what it was supposed to be. I still heard things, of course. You don't cut off a family like mine without the gossip trying to seep through. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing my parents at a much smaller networking event than the ones they used to brag about, staying mostly in the corner. Someone else told me Jason's restaurant dream had been shelved indefinitely and he was talking about moving to a smaller city where the rent was cheaper. Every update came with the same question behind it. Did I feel guilty? The honest answer was no. Sad sometimes. Sure. I mourned the version of family I used to think I had. The one I made excuses for when I was a kid. The one where if I just worked a little harder, proved myself a little more, they'd finally show up for me. But guilt? That's what they tried to train me on for years. I walked away from it. I didn't ruin their lives. I just stepped out of the role where I saved them from the consequences of their own choices. They chose to skip my wedding. They chose to put their image and their comfort above my happiness, above basic respect for the person they raised. All I did was choose myself for once. It took me a long time to realize this, but blood isn't a free pass to treat someone however you want. Family is not a magic word that erases cruelty or manipulation or neglect. The people who love you are the ones who show up when it matters, who don't ask you to shrink yourself or trade your happiness for their reputation. I used to think setting boundaries with family was selfish. That's what they taught me. Now I know it's the opposite. It's how you stop cycles from repeating, how you make sure you don't turn into the kind of person who would skip their own kid's wedding for a photo op on a beach. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the only sound is the dishwasher humming and Danny grading papers at the table, I think about my grandmother's note. Don't look back unless it's to be proud of how far you walked. I didn't walk away because it was easy. I walked away because staying would have meant losing myself piece by piece, forever. If you're listening to this and you have a family that loves you well, I hope you know how lucky you are. Hold on to them. Tell them. And if you're listening and you're stuck in something that looks like love from the outside but feels like control on the inside, I want you to hear this. You're not crazy for wanting more. You are not disloyal for wanting respect. You are not selfish for drawing a line. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop begging people to see your worth and start living like you already know it. My mom skipped my wedding for a trip to Hawaii and thought that would be the story she'd tell forever. 3 days later, she was screaming at my door because for the first time in my life, I stopped opening it just because she knocked. I built a different life on the other side. And honestly, that's the only family forever I need. If you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? Or have you already had to walk away from someone who kept calling themselves family while acting like anything but? Tell me your story. Someone out there might need to hear that they're not alone.